Hey everyone, thanks for coming. This talk is modeling asset risk using grouped EPSS. It's a topic that I've been sort of semi-researching how to operationalize over the past year or so. I wrote a blog on it last year. If you caught that, great. It's more so going to be summarizing what that was and sort of some insights into what I've been doing with it recently. So without further ado, who am I? I am a principal security engineer at Moderna Therapeutics. If you don't know what Moderna is, they're the people who developed the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine. So pretty important stuff. We have a pretty large manufacturing operation there. So lots of fun problems to solve. I'm also the EPSS Special Interest Group co-chair, along with Jay Jacobs. Essentially, what I do there is just run part of the community, making sure that our... All right, one sec. Yeah, that's fine. Cool. Sorry about that. I previously worked at Peloton, and prior to that, I was a contractor for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. Did a lot of interesting work there, obviously with disparate infrastructure, but I believe I did something that mattered at both of those places. And my life is absolutely bonkers crazy. I'm a dad of 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2. I do not recommend this. So if you're thinking about having kids, please stop it too. It's a fun time. So a lot of this week for me is like I get some clarity and some peace a little bit. So if I'm just not making sense, now you know why. So we have a problem in vulnerability management, where we have an increasing number of, this is just the CVE numbers over the past 25 years now, and they're going up, right? They're going up over time. They're increasingly going up. So essentially what we're doing is we have a pipeline of vulnerability data coming into our organization, and it is not slowing down, and our capacity probably does not change over time. It's probably going to stay the same. I mean, there might be obviously some investments that we make in tools or people or processes to make that better. But in general, I don't think that our capabilities for patching all the things is keeping up with the rate of things coming in. Here's a similar graph from the EPSS stats page, just a different view. You can clearly see 2025 is outperforming all of the other years since 2017, which is, I believe, when the CNA program expanded. So again, increasing rates of vulnerabilities. It begs the question for me, like, what do I do about that, right? This is another slide from the Scientia and Kenna Prioritization and Prediction Volume 3, which basically tells us we're averaging about 10%, or the industry is averaging about 10% of their backlog closing month over month. And so if you couple that with the increasing rate of vulnerabilities coming in, there's a lot of vulnerabilities and data that we sort of have to account for in our environment and organization. So just to summarize how I see the problem, right? We have an increasing arrival rate of CVEs year over year. On average, the industry is addressing approximately 10% of their vulnerability backlog month over month. And so as a vulnerability management program, how do we effectively measure and communicate risk and risk reduction if we aren't fixing everything? And I've been sort of grappling with this problem I don't know, since my days at CMS, where a lot of the stuff at CMS was based off of FedRAMP and vulnerability scoring and the severity of vulnerabilities and which things, or we have audits that happen and we have findings and we have to fix everything in this tiny window to make sure we pass this audit, or just month over month we have over 50% of our vulnerabilities have to get fixed in that month or within that month or something like that, which is just, frankly, it's untenable, right? And it requires us to creatively get around that in some instances, especially in the government where it's just by law required to do certain things, right? So I didn't come up with this, but I read something on the EPSS original user guide on the first.org talking about this concept of scaling EPSS to not just vulnerabilities, but to like assets, network segments, entire departments, entire organizations, to understand what is the probability that at least one of these vulnerabilities will be exploited in the wild, right? So that's what this is. It's the probability that at least one CVE in a group will be exploited. If we hold true that the axiom around EPSS is this is the measure of probability of exploitation in the wild. So that's where we're starting from. And we're grouping our CVEs together based off of either assets or network segments or what have you. Here's a pretty formula that I just threw up here. It's kind of scary. It's got a big pi symbol in it. So if we start in those parentheses, right, on the very right, and we have EPSS sub I, that's just the instance of an EPSS score. And when we do the inverse of that, we get the probability that it won't be exploited in the next 30 days. And then if we take the product of all of those scores for a specific segment, so let's just take assets for an example, we get the cumulative probability that no CVEs on this asset will be exploited, right? So that covers everything from the product symbol to the right. And then we take the inverse of that, it is the probability that at least one of those CVEs will be exploited. So it sort of gives you this cumulative score at the asset level or at the grouping, like whatever you're grouping. But for purposes of this talk, let's just talk about assets, right? Or VMs or instances, whatever. So yeah, this is the snippet from the user guide on first.org. And I'm not a data scientist, nor am I a stats person. Unfortunately, my stats ended in trying to pass a course in college to get a degree. But now I'm revisiting all of that, so it's fun. But essentially, there's this statistical property about the independence of events. And if we assume that vulnerabilities being exploited are independent of each other, then this is sort of valid, right? And I apologize again, there is code in this slide. So I've just hit you with a double whammy of a formula and code. But I put this up here just to sort of show you it's actually really easy to calculate. And this is Python. And I'll explain this, but essentially it's 3 lines of code. And the first one is just importing the pandas library, right? And let's assume that we have a CSV that is flattened that has our mapping of assets to CVEs. And if we import that into a data frame, and then we join that with, or left join that with the current EPSS scores or whatever, if you want to look at it in the past, you can obviously replace that URL and just join those 2 things together. And then at the very bottom, that's the third line there. We can just group on asset ID, and then for each EPSS score, we apply that formula, which is in this Lambda function. So slides will be available. You can look at this later. I have it on my blog. Please feel free to copy and use this in your environments if you're very curious. But yeah, that's it. The result is a a nice mapping of the score per asset, right? And you can just then use that for anything that you want. So I hit you with a double whammy, uh, and I'd like to just cleanse the slides for a second. This is my dog as a puppy. I just it's a cute picture, sir. Microphone. This is a good slide to stop on. Excuse. Dog's name is Finn.
If you take a bunch of assets with those EPSS scores, isn't the EPSS score like the probability of any CV being exploited just like the maximum one? Why do you need this more complicated formula? That's what I'm not understanding.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Why the function isn't just max, just taking the max EPSS score?
So like why? Because I'm talking about the probability of at least one of these things. That means there could be more of them, or it's at least one. Sure, there's a max, and so the score is likely going to be higher than that max, is what we're saying. And yeah, like good point about what do I do with this information? Like, do I just prioritize the CVE that has the highest score? Yeah, I'll get to that.
Okay,
but essentially, yes, like it's a good start. But in the context of everything, we want to look at. We're sort of framing this in asset land rather than vulnerability land, right? Like I want to know which assets are the most vulnerable, or which ones are the most likely to have exploitation activity associated with them, right? So good question. Again, I'm going to stop here. Anyway, yeah. So here's a visual of like some sample data, right? And it's a distribution from 0 to 1. Let's just say like so on the x-axis there is our grouped EPSS score at the asset level, and then just on the y-axis there, the number of assets per bin of like 5% between 0 and 1, right? And so, okay, great. What does this tell us? Like, I have some peaks and valleys between 0 and 1, most notably these higher ones, around 65% and 90% of my assets. Your mileage may vary here. Obviously, this is just completely sample data. Please do not use this as an indication of data that's typical. I don't know what data is typical because I am one person. So I encourage you to look at this internally and try and make sense of it. So like, again, what does this tell me, right? So regardless of the reason for peaks and valleys, it actually gives us a good indicator that, we should investigate this. Like, why are these things hovering around close to 1 or in the middle here, or what's going on at that spike at the very end? Is it because we don't have vulnerability data for these assets, right? But my first indication would be, or my first thought would be, let's look at this one right here. Why are things so high? Is it because there's a lot of CVEs on there with small scores? Or is it just one CVE with something that's 0.95 or something like that? But it does, so it gives us a good avenue of like determining what to look at. And we can also enrich this further. And so this is a sample overlay of like a sample data classification standard that you might have internally. And let's, for purposes of this talk, let's say that you were successfully able to assign what data classification your assets are actually processing, right? So we can say this data classification, or this asset is processing this type of sensitive data, regardless of how many records, right? Let's keep it as qualitative as possible. Again, it gives me a really good marriage between something that I know is the likelihood of an event happening on this asset and the potential impact of it. And to me, that's risk, right? We are able to quantify likelihood at the asset level, and we're able to qualitatively assign attributes to those assets that could indicate impact. Now, could you take this further and go into quantification of impact? Absolutely. I do not know how to do that. So what actions can I take with this information? Obviously, we can just grab that bin near the top, near 1, rank order them by the grouped EPSS score, and grab a meeting with those owners when you find them, because I know that's a difficult problem for everybody. And then again, just like have it like what I've been doing over the past year or something is just taking a very small subset of the very highest thing that I care about and just having a discussion about why is this happening? Why is it the technology stack that we're using on these things? Is it could be a many number of things, like why aren't these things getting patches, right? It gives us information to further our decision-making process to understand what is going on in our environment, versus just relying on there's 10 CVEs with a high EPSS score. Let's go fix them across all of these assets, which is a very valid response. It's more of a let's go a step further and understand why these assets are emanating such high likelihood of exploitation. So in that meeting, obviously, you can investigate the business purposes and potential impact of compromise of these things. Again, why are these assets not getting patches? How we can overall improve our security posture based off of this information. And then the last one here, to your point back there, which CVEs will move the grouped EPSS score needle the most across assets? Which brings me to this. This is another little formula. I apologize again. I do not have another picture of my dog for this one. But it's essentially just the difference between the asset score after you remove said vulnerability from that. And essentially, it is rank ordered by the CVE with the highest EPSS score, right? But it also tells us how much fixing this CVE or addressing this CVE will actually improve our posture, right? So yes, we could look at the ones with the highest score on this specific asset, but it's only going to move the needle very, very minimally, right? But on this asset, if we do the same thing, our posture on that asset goes way up. We're able to reduce risk there a lot more. So again, just delta grouped EPSS is just taking the number of CVEs on an asset and subtracting the same score when you remove said CVE. So getting into what happens over time, right? Ideally, based off of the decisions that we're making here, we see this reduce, right? We start seeing things shift left here, and that's in an ideal situation, but we all know that we don't live in that world, and we're very dependent on outside influences such as the arrival rate of CVEs and the shifting in EPSS scores on a daily basis, right? So this graph, in my experience, just fluctuates. Not majorly, right? But on a daily basis, you could graph this and see just the fluctuations of your posture. And so in my opinion, it's sort of measuring what your asset risk posture could be on a day-to-day basis. And to me, I mean, granted, you're doing this on a day-to-day basis. You can easily do this at a lesser interval, right? But to me, even if we don't move things to the left, right? And because we're not in control of the the amount of CVEs that are coming into our environment, or the EPSS scores, right? It's just giving us a window into reality, right? This is sort of, okay, I'm able to sort of clear some of the fog of war here. It gives us just more information, right? And more information in vulnerability management means I can make better decisions. So I really sort of see this as more like a decision support mechanism, where we are looking at the things that are the most risky to the organization, and putting our effort there, right? And so, one example is, say, you're a vulnerability management program manager, and your CISO is telling you, oh, my top priority is data security this year, right? You can use this as a way for the vulnerability management program to effectively start addressing the things that matter most to the CISO, right? You can, if you map these things together, you can come back and say, this asset is 95% likely to have exploitation activity associated with it in the wild, and it also processes our most sensitive information, right? That's one statement that we can make. Granted, it's not the complete picture, but it is a start, right? It does give us a leg up into understanding, the risk that our assets may be posing to the organization. And with that, we have some takeaways, and if you like Bluey, right there, that's another good slide to stop on.
Great presentation. Thank you. When you were messaging this data, did you take the data about the group EPSS score from the highest probability of being exploited assets and analyze how what was the tipping point? How many of those vulnerabilities will need to be remediated? Do you see any trend to move it from the 1.0 to the...
Yeah, so going back to this, right? Like, can we do N-2, N-3, N-4? Absolutely. Where is the tipping point? Exactly. Have I done that? Maybe once, right? I'm doing this, I'm researching this in my free time, right? But also semi-professionally as well, right? This conversation and this presentation, I hope you take away, go look at your data and see what it tells you and whether or not you can actually make better decisions because of it. And to your point, a tipping point is a great place to look at, right? Like, for this specific asset, how many do I have to fix in order for it to be below my threshold of tolerance, right? I can set a tolerance at the CVE level, at the EPSS score level. I can set a tolerance at the asset level. So takeaways. None of what I just said substitutes for good patch management. So please don't take that away, right? Please be doing that. That's a very difficult problem to solve. That's not the problem I'm solving here. I know firsthand how difficult that is. It also provides a lens into your vulnerability risk posture, right? If we say risk is a function of impact and likelihood, we have likelihood based off of EPSS at the asset level, or at another grouping level, right? And then if we have a good asset inventory, we can marry that with other data sets, such as, how important this asset is to the organization, what is it doing, who owns it, blah, 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 blah. Like, it gives us a nice way to sort of frame our problem, our risk posture. The other thing is it helps to prioritize by riskiest asset or other grouping, right? I struggle with this a lot, right? I look at vulnerability data on a daily basis, and I see, what are the top things I need to fix, but nothing really tells us which assets are the riskiest, right? Like, sure, like your products in your environment are going to have like a risk score or something like that. I really never know what those mean. I want to know what's in my environment and with codified business context and looking at the exploitation in the wild and marrying those two together. And again, like I said before, you might not have the desired effect based off your actions, but that doesn't mean you're failing. It means that you're making smarter decisions, right? So the last takeaway I'd give is it's a decision support mechanism, and it indicates which assets or groups require additional effort that you may not have known about beforehand. And so with that, that's it.
Thank you. We do have time for maybe one quick question.
Yeah.
Hey, Stephen, great talk. Thanks for showing
Yeah.
all the data. But I think there's a really interesting opportunity, and you kind of hinted at it, of being able to see in an environment how risk can change.
Yep.
You can see where your efforts are targeted. I mean, are you looking at, you know, building some of that in and showing how remediation efforts in an environment can move the needle, and you can see where your efforts are most effective in changing that?
Yeah, I didn't put this slide in, and I have a bunch of notes, just whatever. Grouping EPSS at the action level, right? Like we could do something like that, right? Granted, we have that data available to us. I mean, a lot of the problem that I have right now is, okay, I have some set of remediations that I know about. Okay, great, I'll take that. Can I say which ones have the most impact? Yeah, exactly. Thanks.